The moment I walked into the elegantly decorated room, I felt the air thrum with anticipation. Balloons swayed lightly above the polished mahogany table, glinting in the soft glow of the chandelier, while the scent of fresh flowers and birthday cake mingled in the air. Guests chatted and laughed, their voices a gentle hum beneath the upbeat music playing from hidden speakers. I smiled, trying to calm the fluttering in my stomach. It was supposed to be a simple birthday celebration for my husband, a joyful evening with family and friends. But something in the atmosphere made my chest tighten with unease. I had learned to read the subtle currents of tension in our family, to sense the unspoken disagreements lurking just beneath polite conversation. His sister, a striking woman with sharp features and an even sharper tongue, had been watching me since the moment I arrived. There was a certain coldness in her gaze that made my skin prickle. I tried to ignore it, focusing on greeting guests and helping with small arrangements, but a sense of foreboding lingered, like a shadow stretching across the room. The party seemed normal at first. Laughter, toasts, clinking glasses. But then came the moment that shifted everything.
She shouldn't be here. The words cut through the room like a knife. Every conversation halted mid-sentence. The clinking of glasses stilled, and for a heartbeat, even the music seemed to fade. My husband froze, a fork suspended mid-air, eyes wide in shock. The guests turned toward the voice, murmuring in confusion, some looking between us, unsure of what they had just heard. I felt my stomach drop. The woman who was supposed to be family, the one who had always seemed poised and controlled, had just attacked me publicly in front of everyone. My cheeks burned, a combination of embarrassment, anger, and disbelief washing over me. I opened my mouth to respond, to defend myself, but the words caught in my throat. My husband's sister didn't pause. "I've put up with this long enough," she said, her voice rising, dripping with venom. This whole situation, it's wrong, and I won't stand by any longer while she pretends to belong here."
The room was suffused with tension, every eye fixed on us. I could see some guests shifting awkwardly, unsure whether to intervene, while others seemed frozen, anticipating a confrontation they knew would explode at any second. My husband stood, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to calm the storm, but even he seemed unsure of how to proceed. And then came the silence, a charged, expectant pause. His sister's eyes were blazing, fixed on me with a mix of accusation and fury. But in that silence, I sensed the undercurrent of something deeper, something hidden. This wasn't just jealousy or dislike, it was personal, layered, and rooted in a secret I didn't yet understand. Finally, with a voice barely above a whisper, but full of gravity, my husband spoke. "Enough," he said, his tone commanding attention despite its softness. "There are things that need to be said, truths that have been buried for far too long." The room held its breath. I could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on me, on him, and even on his sister, who now seemed almost uncertain, as if she had unleashed a force she hadn't fully anticipated. And that's when the truth began to unfold. Slowly, painfully, with each revelation peeling back layers of resentment, secrets, and lies that had been carefully hidden for years. The room remained frozen in that heavy silence, each guest caught between curiosity and discomfort. I could feel my husband's eyes on me, a mix of guilt and fear swirling in his gaze, and I knew without words that he had never imagined his sister would lash out like this. She, on the other hand, seemed fueled by years of restraint, her chest rising and falling with each sharp breath, as though she had been holding this confrontation inside for far too long. Finally, my husband stepped forward, placing a hand on the polished surface of the table. His voice, though soft, carried a weight that made everyone lean in. "She has a right to be here," he said, looking directly at me.
And you need to hear something you've never been told before." The words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. I swallowed, a chill running down my spine. Something significant was coming. Something that would explain the fury in his sister's voice and the tension that had been quietly building under every family gathering we had attended. "You see," he began, his eyes darting briefly toward his sister, "there are truths that were hidden from everyone, truths that were kept to protect people, or perhaps to hide shame. And tonight, the time for hiding is over." I felt a tremor of apprehension ripple through me. I had thought I knew my husband, thought I understood his family, but the intensity in his eyes, the gravity in his voice suggested I had been naive. There were pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know existed. His sister crossed her arms, still radiating defiance, yet there was a flicker of unease in her expression, as if the words he was about to speak might reveal something she had not anticipated. The guests shifted, leaning in subtly, their murmurs subdued but electric with anticipation. Then he began to speak, slowly, deliberately. "You've been told stories about this family, about our past, about why things are the way they are, but many of those stories were incomplete. Some of them were false. And the truth? The truth has been kept from you for far too long." A hush fell over the room, the kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. I could feel my heartbeat, loud and rapid, echoing in my ears. Whatever was coming would change everything, not just my perception of them, but my place in this family, and perhaps my very future. "What truth?" I finally asked, my voice trembling despite my efforts to steady it. His brother, who had remained quietly in the background, stepped forward for the first time that evening. He held a small, worn envelope in his hand, the edges frayed as if it had been handled countless times. "This," he said softly, extending it toward me, "contained something you were never meant to see. Something that explains why she said what she did, and why so many things in this family have been controlled by fear and silence." I stared at the envelope, the weight of it heavy in my hands. The room seemed to shrink around me, the air dense with anticipation and dread. I realized in that moment that this party, meant to celebrate, meant to be joyous, was now the stage for revelations that could either destroy the fragile bonds of this family or begin the painful process of truth, understanding, and perhaps reconciliation. I hesitated for a heartbeat, then slowly opened the envelope. Inside were letters, photographs, and documents that chronicled secrets long buried. Secrets that implicated not just his sister, but others in ways I could barely comprehend. Each page I turned made the room feel smaller, the whispers of the guests fading into a background hum. And with every revelation, I felt a mixture of fear, sorrow, and an odd sense of clarity. The fury that had erupted earlier was not about me. It had been about hidden truths, unspoken grievances, and generations of silence. And now, those truths were finally coming to light, all at once. The room remained thick with tension as I sifted through the contents of the envelope. Every letter, every photograph, revealed a hidden layer of the family's past, a past that had been meticulously concealed, carefully curated to maintain appearances. I felt the weight of the revelations pressing down on me, yet at the same time, an odd sense of empowerment began to grow. I was no longer just a participant in this family drama. I had become a witness to the truth, a keeper of secrets too long buried. His sister's face had shifted from fury to a subtle unease, a crack forming in her confident armor. She shifted in place, eyes darting between me and my husband, as though trying to anticipate what I might do with the knowledge I now held. You shouldn't be looking at those," she finally said, her voice less sharp, more defensive, tinged with fear. I looked up, meeting her gaze steadily. "I think I have a right to see the truth," I said quietly, "because everything you've tried to hide, it has affected more than just you. It has affected all of us, including me." The guests murmured softly, some exchanging glances, others clearly captivated by the unfolding drama. The soft clinking of glasses and the lingering scent of birthday cake felt surreal, almost like remnants of a normal evening that no longer existed. Every face in the room seemed to carry a private reaction: shock, curiosity, guilt, or silent judgment, but none dared to speak. The weight of the past was suffocating, and the room felt suspended in a fragile, tense moment between revelation and reaction. My husband, still pale from the earlier confrontation, finally spoke. These, these letters, these documents, they explain so much. Things I never wanted to confront. Things I've tried to bury along with the rest of the lies. But they also show how much has been lost to fear, secrecy, and pride. He gestured toward his sister, whose eyes were now glistening with unshed tears. It's not just about anger, or blame, or resentment. It's about understanding what led us here and deciding if we're willing to face it honestly. The envelope trembled slightly in my hands as I held it closer, feeling the gravity of what it represented. The letters were not just pieces of paper, they were the very key to understanding why she had shouted, why the family had behaved as they did, and why my presence had become such a point of contention. One by one, the revelations began to unfold aloud. My husband's voice grew steadier as he recounted long-hidden betrayals, financial missteps, and private disputes that had never been spoken of outside the walls of the home. His sister's defenses began to crumble, her anger giving way to guilt and regret, small cracks forming in the facade she had carefully maintained for years. I could feel the energy in the room shift. The hostility that had filled the air when she first shouted had not vanished entirely, but it had transformed. It became tentative, cautious, a fragile bridge between the past and the possibility of understanding. The guests, once frozen in uncomfortable silence, now leaned forward slightly, drawn into the emotional gravity of the moment. For the first time that evening, I felt a flicker of hope. The fury and judgment that had seemed so absolute were being tempered by the undeniable force of truth. And yet, I knew this was only the beginning. The letters had opened a door, but what lay beyond it, confrontation, confession, forgiveness, had yet to fully emerge. As I looked around the room, I realized that the night, which had begun as a celebration, had transformed into something far more profound. A reckoning, a confrontation with the hidden past, and a test for whether this family could survive honesty, raw emotion, and the truths long kept in the shadows. The room had transformed into a stage where every glance, every movement carried meaning. The once celebratory atmosphere was gone, replaced by a heavy tension that pressed against every wall. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some pretending to sip their drinks, others staring intently at the unfolding drama, unable to look away. His sister's hands trembled slightly as she ran them along the edge of the table. I didn't mean to say that," she stammered, her voice softer, yet still carrying a lingering edge of anger. I've always felt this way, and seeing her here, pretending, it brought everything back." I met her gaze calmly. "Pretending what? That your family is perfect? That all the secrets and lies don't exist? I don't pretend. I face the truth, even when it's painful. And now, so must you." She flinched, as though my words had struck deeper than any anger could. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the battle between resentment, fear, and a reluctant desire to finally acknowledge what had been hidden for so long. My husband, still pale from the earlier confrontation, finally raised his voice,
commanding the room's attention. "Enough hiding," he said, his tone sharper now, edged with years of suppressed frustration. "We've spent too long pretending everything was fine. Secrets have poisoned this family, and it ends tonight, if we have the courage to face it." Gasps and murmurs swept through the room. Some guests turned away, embarrassed to witness the intensity, while others leaned in, captivated by the raw exposure of private truths. The air seemed charged, every heartbeat amplified as if the room itself was aware that something irreversible was unfolding. The envelope in my hands felt heavier than ever. I opened one of the letters aloud, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound steady. The words spilled into the room, admissions of betrayal, hidden resentments, financial deceit, and lies carefully constructed to protect appearances. Each revelation seemed to pull at the threads holding the family together, and yet, paradoxically, they also illuminated the reasons behind years of tension. His sister flinched at each confession, her sharp composure cracking. I didn't know it was like this," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rising tension. I thought it was all simple. I never realized." Her brother stepped forward, placing a tentative hand on her shoulder. "It wasn't simple," he said quietly, "and pretending it was only made it worse. But now it's not too late to choose honesty, to choose a new path." The room seemed to hold its breath. Guests exchanged glances, uncertain whether to intervene or remain silent. But the energy had shifted. This was no longer just a family argument. It was a reckoning. Every suppressed emotion, every hidden grievance, every unspoken fear was now coming to the surface, demanding to be confronted. I felt a strange mixture of dread and relief. The storm had arrived, and it would not be gentle. But within the chaos, there was clarity. The family could no longer function in the shadows of lies. Every reaction, every confession, every tear was a step toward a fragile, uncertain truth. And as the evening stretched on, the tension only deepened. The next revelations, I realized, would not just shock the family, they could redefine everything, altering relationships, loyalties, and the fragile balance of trust that remained. The room had become a crucible of emotion. Every subtle movement, every glance seemed magnified, charged with unspoken truths and simmering resentment. Guests shifted in their seats, their whispers like soft undercurrents in a storm, unable to ignore the tension building to a near breaking point. His sister's composure finally snapped. "You think you can just waltz in here, claiming the moral high ground?" She spat, her voice sharp, trembling with barely contained fury. "You've never understood what it's like to live in this family, to deal with the lies and betrayals we've all had to swallow. And now you're here, pretending you belong." I stood my ground, feeling the weight of her accusation, but also a strange surge of determination. "I don't pretend," I said firmly. "I've never pretended. And tonight, I see everything. Everything you've tried to keep hidden. This isn't about me. It's about the truths you've refused to face." My husband ran a hand through his hair, pacing like a man on the edge. "Stop," he muttered, almost to himself. "Stop turning this into a fight that no one wins. We have to confront the reality of what's been done, or we'll destroy ourselves completely." But the confrontation had already erupted. His sister threw the first piece of information into the open, her voice shaking. "Do you even know why Mother disowned me for 10 years? Or why Father kept secrets that ruined every relationship we had? You have no idea how deep the rot goes." The room fell silent as she produced a faded envelope from her purse, tossing it onto the table. Everyone froze, staring at the bundle of letters and documents. I recognized the careful handwriting immediately. These were the confessions, the hidden truths that had been locked away for decades.
I I kept them, she admitted reluctantly, because I thought no one was ready for the truth. But now, her voice cracked. Now you forced it out, and there's no turning back. My husband and I exchanged a look of disbelief. Each letter revealed layers of betrayal, affairs, financial manipulations, and years of calculated deception. The people in the room were no longer who they had pretended to be. Masks had fallen.
One by one, family members began to react. Some recoiled in shock, covering their mouths or turning away. Others leaned in, captivated and horrified by the revelations. The subtle murmurs escalated into fragmented arguments, accusations flying in every direction, voices overlapping in a cacophony of anger, sorrow, and disbelief. I felt my heart pound. The storm was no longer contained. It had spilled over, touching everyone in the room. Yet amid the chaos, I began to see the fragile beginnings of understanding. Small acknowledgments, reluctant apologies, fleeting glances of empathy appeared between the most bitter arguments. It was in that turbulent space, where anger met truth, that the first real possibility of reconciliation flickered. But it was fragile, tentative, and could be extinguished by even a single misstep. I realized then that the next hours would determine whether this family could survive honesty, whether they could rebuild, or whether the secrets of the past would tear them apart entirely. And deep down, I understood that the envelope on the table, those confessions, those documents, was the key. Whoever could face it first, whoever could accept the full scope of truth, would guide the family either toward redemption or further destruction. The air in the room felt almost tangible, thick with the weight of suppressed resentment, years of unspoken grievances, and the raw electricity of truth finally breaking free. The envelope lay between us, a silent testament to decades of hidden pain. As everyone in the room shifted uneasily, caught between anticipation and fear. His sister's eyes darted toward me, a mixture of defiance and something else, regret perhaps, or the faintest trace of vulnerability she had never allowed herself to show. "You think you understand everything now?" she snapped, her voice trembling. "You don't know what it's like to carry this, to live with the consequences of what's been hidden from you." I inhaled deeply, feeling my pulse hammer in my ears. "I don't claim to understand everything," I said firmly, "but I can see the truth now. And the truth doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to all of us, and it can no longer stay buried." Her face paled slightly, and she sank into the chair across from me, as if the words had struck deeper than any accusation ever could. My husband, his jaw tight, ran a hand over his face, his eyes scanning the letters on the table. "We've all carried lies," he admitted quietly, voice hoarse. "All these years, trying to protect each other, to protect ourselves. But the cost has been more than I ever realized." The guests, once mere observers, were now caught in the swell of revelation. A murmur ran through the room, fragmented sentences and half-spoken truths spilling into the tense air. Some glanced nervously at each other, while others leaned in, desperate to witness the next layer of secrets being unveiled. Then she spoke again, voice barely a whisper, trembling with emotion. "Mother, she wanted to protect us, but in doing so, she buried everything. Every betrayal, every mistake, every heartbreak, all hidden behind a perfect facade. And Father," her words faltered, "Father wasn't innocent either. His choices, his secrets, they've haunted us all." The room seemed to hold its breath. Even my husband's brother, who had remained calm throughout, showed the first flicker of unease, his hands tightening around the letters he had held so carefully. The truth was spreading, seeping into every corner, touching every heart with its unavoidable weight. I reached for one of the letters, carefully opening it. The words on the page hit me like a physical blow. Confessions of betrayal, unspoken agreements, hidden relationships, financial deceptions, and decisions made to control or manipulate outcomes. Each revelation layered new tension atop the old, creating a precarious web of emotions and unresolved pain.
Tears began to stream down his sister's face. I never wanted this, she said, her voice breaking. I only wanted what I thought was right, to protect what little I could. But maybe I made it worse. My husband's hands shook as he spoke next. It's not just her, not just me, not just anyone. It's all of us. We've all made choices we regret, and the consequences, they've caught up with us tonight. I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. The storm was no longer on the horizon. It had arrived in full force. Yet amidst the chaos, there was a fragile clarity forming. Truth, however painful, had a way of exposing the paths we could not see before, forcing decisions that would define the family's future. And then quietly, but firmly, his brother said something that made the room still completely. We can't undo the past, but we can choose what happens next. Will we let this destroy us, or will we face it together? The question hung in the air, demanding a response, and for the first time that evening, it wasn't just a matter of secrets or blame. It was a matter of choice, courage, and whether the family could survive the truths now laid bare.
The room felt like it existed in a different reality now. The birthday party had long since dissolved into something unrecognizable, a stage where past grievances, hidden truths, and raw emotions played out for everyone to see. The letters still lay on the table, their presence a silent yet relentless reminder of everything that had been kept in shadows for years. My sister, still tearful, sat back in her chair, the fire in her eyes replaced by exhaustion and tentative reflection. She looked at me, her voice softer, almost fragile. I didn't realize how much was really buried. I thought I understood, but maybe I was wrong. I nodded slowly. It's not easy to face the past, I said, my voice steady, despite the storm in my chest. But acknowledging it is the only way forward, for all of us. My husband sank into a chair, running a hand across his face as if trying to erase the tension etched into his features. I've spent so many years pretending everything was perfect, and I failed to see what my silence and my avoidance caused. His sister glanced at him, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her expression. You think I was wrong to shout? She asked hesitantly. Maybe I shouldn't have, but I needed to be heard. I needed someone to finally say, this can't continue. I reached for the envelope, carefully lifting it as though it contained the fragile balance of the entire room. You've been heard, I said softly. And now the rest of us have to decide how to respond. Not with anger, but with honesty, even if it hurts. A hush fell over the room as the guests, who had been watching silently for what felt like hours, shifted uneasily. Some of them began murmuring quietly, acknowledging truths about their own lives, realizing how much the family's hidden past had touched them all. Others seemed frozen, caught in the shock of revelations that had disrupted the image of unity and perfection they had once clung to. Then, for the first time, a subtle shift occurred. The brother who had remained calm throughout the evening stepped forward and addressed everyone directly. We can choose to continue living in the lies and fear of exposure, he said, his tone steady, or we can start the difficult process of rebuilding. It won't be easy, and it won't be immediate. But the alternative is more damage, more resentment, more silence. We have a choice. A faint nod passed between my husband and his sister. A small step, but significant. The anger and hostility hadn't vanished. They lingered like shadows, but the first seeds of understanding had been planted. For the first time that evening, it felt like the family could actually breathe, even in the midst of turmoil. I glanced around the room, noticing small gestures of reconciliation. A hand reaching out tentatively, a quiet apology offered and accepted, an understanding nod. These moments were fragile, yet they were proof that the revelation of truth, however painful, could also open a door to healing. And yet, despite these tentative bridges, I knew the night was far from over. There were still hidden wounds to confront, still emotions simmering just beneath the surface, waiting for another spark to bring them fully into the open. The envelope, the letters, and the truths they contained had shifted the balance of power and understanding in the room, and the coming hours would determine whether that shift would lead to reconciliation or complete collapse. For now, the family was suspended in that delicate tension, caught between anger and empathy, fear and understanding, resentment and the possibility of forgiveness. And in that suspended moment, I realized that the hardest work was just beginning. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Even as the first tentative gestures of reconciliation had begun, the undercurrent of resentment remained, pulling at the fragile threads that held the room together. No one spoke at first. Each of us was caught in the uneasy quiet that follows revelation, when the weight of what has been exposed presses on every chest like a stone. Then his sister stood abruptly, the chair scraping sharply against the floor. Her eyes were blazing once more, but now with a mixture of grief and defiance. "You think seeing these letters changes everything?" she shouted, her voice cracking under the strain. "Do you understand what it took for me to survive all this? To live in a house where love was conditional, where lies were daily currency, and secrets were worth more than honesty?" I met her gaze steadily, refusing to look away. "I can't claim to know what you went through," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But I do know one thing. The lies have hurt more than any of us realized, and pretending they don't exist only allows the pain to continue." My husband stepped forward, placing a trembling hand on her arm. "I never realized," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion, "how much silence and avoidance cost us. Every time we looked the other way, we built walls instead of bridges. And now we have to decide whether we tear those walls down or let them crush us." Her tears flowed freely now, streaking down her cheeks, and I felt an unexpected surge of empathy for her. She was no longer the woman who had shouted at me earlier. She was someone broken, struggling to navigate the wreckage left by years of secrets and fear. She began, voice trembling. "I wanted things to be normal. I wanted to believe in something perfect, even when it wasn't real." At that moment, the brother who had been the quiet observer all evening stepped forward once more. He held the envelope firmly, as if it were a lifeline. "Normal doesn't exist here," he said softly, yet with authority. "But honesty does, and we have to choose whether we embrace it or continue hiding behind lies. The letters, the truths, they're not weapons, they're keys. The question is, who is brave enough to use them?" A heavy silence followed, pregnant with anticipation. Guests exchanged glances, sensing that what had been hidden for so long was finally being confronted in its full scope. Some looked away, overwhelmed by the intensity, while others leaned closer, drawn into the drama like moths to a flame. Then, unexpectedly, one of the older relatives, who had been quietly observing in a corner, spoke. Her voice was sharp, edged with the authority of experience. "All this time, you've let pride and fear dictate your lives.
Do you really think shouting and pointing fingers tonight will heal anything? Or is it just another way to avoid the responsibility of facing the consequences of your actions? Her words hit like a hammer, forcing each of us to reflect. The confrontation that had seemed centered on me, on my presence in the family, was no longer about blame. It was about accountability. Each person in that room was implicated, each choice and omission examined under the harsh light of truth. I felt my chest tighten. The storm of emotion, now swirling with renewed intensity, threatened to overwhelm everyone. But within it, I sensed the faintest glimmer of something unexpected. Possibility. Possibility that even in the midst of anger, grief, and fear, the family might find a path forward. A path that demanded honesty, courage, and the willingness to face the darkest corners of the past. And as the night stretched on, each revelation, each confrontation, and each tearful admission began to form a fragile mosaic, a mosaic that, despite its cracks, hinted at the potential for redemption, understanding, and perhaps the first steps toward genuine healing.
The night had stretched into hours, each minute heavy with revelations and unspoken emotions. The letters lay scattered across the table, their contents no longer secrets but undeniable truths, etched into the minds of everyone present. Faces that had once been masks of composure were now raw, vulnerable, and exposed. His sister, once the fiercest voice of accusation, now sat slumped, tears streaming freely, a mixture of sorrow and relief etched on her face. I never wanted to hurt anyone," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I just didn't know how to face what was real." I reached out, placing a tentative hand near hers, not to erase the past, but to acknowledge it. "None of us wanted this," I said softly, "but it's happened, and now the only choice we have is what we do next." My husband's eyes met mine, a storm of guilt, fear, and love swirling within them. "We've been living in illusions for too long," he admitted. "But seeing the truth tonight, I realized that hiding never protected us. It only made us fragile, divided, and afraid." The brother who had remained calm through the chaos spoke again, his voice steady yet resolute. "We can either let the past define us, continue the cycle of blame and resentment, or we can decide to face it together, imperfect as we are, and rebuild something real." The words hung in the air, and for a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, imperceptibly, the tension in the room began to shift. Small gestures emerged, a nod of acknowledgement here, a quiet sigh there, a hand extended in tentative reconciliation. The anger that had filled the space was still present, but now it was tempered by understanding, a fragile, budding recognition that truth, however painful, could also be liberating. My sister finally looked directly at me. "I can't promise everything will be perfect," she said, her voice hoarse, "but I want to try. If you're willing to accept us as we are, not the family we pretended to be." I nodded, feeling a strange warmth despite the exhaustion and heartbreak of the evening. "I don't need perfect," I said. "I need real. And if we face it together, maybe we can build that." My husband reached across the table, taking both our hands in his, a silent promise that despite the pain, the arguments, and the years of secrecy, we could choose honesty and connection over the weight of lies. The guests, too, began to breathe more easily, sensing the subtle shift in energy. The room, once a battleground of accusations, was now a place of tentative hope, a space where the fractured pieces of the family could begin the slow, painful process of coming together. As the night drew to a close, I realized that this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The letters, the confessions, The confrontations had all been necessary, but what came next would require patience, courage, and empathy. Healing would not be immediate, forgiveness would not be easy, and the scars would remain. But for the first time, the family had a chance to confront reality together, to embrace imperfection, and to choose connection over division. And in that quiet, fragile moment, surrounded by the aftermath of truth and emotion, I felt a glimmer of something I had longed for all along. Hope. Real, complicated, human hope, strong enough to carry us through the long night and into the uncertain yet promising days ahead.